Okay, so last week we looked at the Magi again. We talked about the Magi twice. The Gentile astronomers from a faraway land that were led by God to Jerusalem to proclaim to Israel the birth of their Messiah. And that was just a real interesting thing, that Gentile pagans, what do we say? The best example of the worst kind of people, pagans of the worst kind, sorcerers, God brought over to tell Israel about their king. They came looking for the Messiah so they could worship him. That's the other incredible thing. It's like, how do these guys know about worshiping the God of Israel? So today we'll look at another character in Matthew chapter 2 who wanted to find the Messiah. So this character also wanted to find the Messiah, but not for the same reason. We're going to look at Herod. He did not want to worship the king. He wanted to kill him. We briefly discussed Herod last time. He was not of Jewish heritage. His family converted. They were Idumeans, they were Edomites, and we just know that through history. So they weren't of Jewish lineage. They were installed there by the Romans. His family was installed as the king. So he wasn't a legitimate Jewish king. This is why there was a lot of animosity between the Jewish people and him. The Jewish people did not accept him. The Jewish leadership did not accept this conversion. They knew he was an illegitimate king. And we can even see Matthew alluding to this in the text. So remember, we're trying to look at all the little details in the text. Herod is introduced as king and even called king up until the real king, Jesus, is found and worshipped by the Magi. So he's mentioned as King Herod, King Herod, King Herod. Then once Jesus is proclaimed, then he's only called Herod.
Oh, wow.
Because the real king has been identified. The real king is coronated, and Herod is kind of, in a sense, dethroned.
Wow, that's interesting.
So now let's look at Matthew chapter 2 again. This time we're going to be focusing on Herod and focusing on verses 13 through 18. So one commentator that I went through when I put these notes together, he described Herod like this. He says he was racially Arab, religiously Jewish, culturally Greek, and politically Roman.
Wow. Would you say that one more time?
He was racially Arab, religiously Jewish, culturally Greek, and politically Roman.
Sounds like our politician.
So yeah, he was an interesting character, to say the least. If the Magi were a picture of humanity that accepts the gospel when they hear it, and are therefore redeemed, because remember, they're pagans, they heard the voice of God, however it was communicated to them to follow the star and to come to worship Jesus, well, they accepted that call. And remember, we talked about potentially they traveled 2 years to get to this point to come and worship him.
Mm-hmm.
So they're a picture of someone who accepts this call of God. Herod is a picture of humanity that rejects the gospel when it is heard. So I'm sure we've known people who have heard the gospel and have totally rejected it. We've seen people who have heard the gospel and accept it. And we can see those two pictures of people. So Herod is a picture of someone who totally rejects the gospel. Okay, let's go to Matthew 2 and verse 1. Now after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of Herod the king, Magi from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod the king heard this, he was troubled, and all Jerusalem with him. So all Jerusalem was troubled with him. Why were they troubled? Okay, so trouble for Herod, it meant trouble for everyone else. For he ruled over everyone. Okay? Herod it is known that he killed 3 of his own sons in order to keep his crown. Everyone knew that he was obsessed with being king. He wasn't going to allow anyone to take that away from him. I mean, to the point where he's going to kill his own children so they wouldn't succeed him. That's a crazy dude. Even Caesar Augustus said, "It is better to be Herod's pig than his son."
Wow.
Nobody was going to get in the way of him being king. He would kill anyone that would try to dethrone him. Nobody was going to rule over him. Nobody was going to tell him what to do. Nobody. And he was going to make sure of that. So this image of Herod is a picture of fallen humanity. Rebellion, utter rebellion. And rebellion is the reaction of fallen man when they find out that the king is Jesus. Jesus is Lord. I mean, we see that all the time. We see people coming against Christianity in everywhere, in the media, in movies and music. You know, that's one of the interesting things in Israel. So I've been told is that people with Jewish heritage can make aliyah, which means they can return to Israel because they have Jewish lineage, and they can become a citizen. They can have like a dual citizenship in the U.S. or anywhere in the world, and citizenship in Israel. They just have to go and prove their citizenship. They can be atheists. They can be Buddhist, Hindu, New Age, or whatever. They can believe anything except if they believe that Jesus is God. They cannot make aliyah.
Now, say that again. If they believe Jesus is God, they cannot.
Right. If they're a Christian, then they forfeit their right of return.
I hadn't heard that.
Yeah. Wow. They can't convert. They can't go over. And people can't convert to Judaism unless they deny Jesus.
How does they reconcile that with we're trying to save everybody? The Bible says to save everybody.
Yeah.
And they're excluding people.
Right.
On
yeah.
purpose.
Yeah. My thinking is, if you consider the current state of Israel and when it was reestablished, right after World War II, right after the Holocaust, which was perpetrated against the Jews by a so-called Christian, and they did it in the name of Christ. They did it saying that they were following after the teachings of Martin Luther. And so I think it's a knee-jerk reaction to that, to say, no, we're not going to allow this in here. So Jesus is Lord. He's God. But to Herod, there is no God. If there is a God, then that means that the Bible is true. The Bible is full of rules and regulations. The Bible is full of thou shalt nots. The Bible is trying to tell me how to live, and nobody's going to tell me what to do. I'm my own person, and I do what I want. So that's why people reject Christianity. That's why people reject the gospel, because they don't want to be told what to do. Mm-hmm. They don't want to have this book of rules. I'm free. I'm on my own. I can make up my own choices. Yeah. So that's why people reject the gospel. They don't want to be told what to do. Answering to authority is something that we're going to have to do all of our lives. One of the reasons I joined the Army, right when I got out of high school, was to escape the rules of my parents. Yeah, I think I told you about this. I tried. I was tired of them telling me, how to live, what to do, and things that how to do in the house, in my room. I was 18 years old, and I thought I knew it all. They were, in my mind, they were adults, and they lived in the past. Everything that they did and experienced was back then. Mm-hmm. It was the 80s. Yeah. They didn't know how to live in the 80s. I had all the answers to, all the stuff that was around me. But I found out very quickly that the Army had more rules, so many more rules than my parents ever did. I went from the frying pan into the fire. Now, and also, I've mentioned, I don't know if I've mentioned here, but one of the reasons, there's several different reasons I joined the Army, but one of them was to escape just the element around me. Mm-hmm. All of my friends were getting into drugs, they were getting into drinking, and they were just going down, and one by one, they were just going off in a bad way. And I thought, if I can't get out of here, I'm going to end up like them. So I needed to find a way to get out, and that's one of the reasons I joined the Army. But the other part was, okay, I'm 18 years old. I'm an adult now. My parents need to quit telling me what to do.
Was one of the reasons like you wanted to get away because you thought you'd go that maybe down that path? But was it hard for you to say no to them? Was that one of the reasons? Because
no, it wasn't hard to say no to them, but there just weren't many options outside of what. And I met a good friend who was kind of in the same situation. He left California for the same reason, that there was just everything was there, and just wanted to get away and get into the Army, somewhere where you're, a little bit more
disciplined.
Learn some discipline. And that's kind of what I thought too. I wanted to learn some discipline, but I wanted to get away from the rules. I didn't know what I was thinking. I didn't talk to anyone when I signed up. I just signed up and came home and said, I'm leaving next month. And one girl that I worked with at Denny's, she was always talking about the Navy, because she wanted to join the Navy. She was always talking about it. And I went to work that next week, and I said, hey, LaRonda, I signed up. I'm leaving for the Army. She's like, what are you, crazy? There's a war going on. I'm like, what war? She's like, Iraq just invaded Kuwait. I'm like, what are you talking about? I never watched the news. I signed up right when that happened.
Wow.
Anyway.
Glad to have you.
Yeah. Well, you're always talking about it. I thought you'd be happy for me. So I was running from authority, and in the process, I put myself in a place where I had less control of my life more than ever. I couldn't make decisions on my own. The government dictated my life, and I did not own myself anymore. And I remember when I swore in, that's what really woke me up. Right when I swore in, you were there at the MEP Center with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine, and Coast Guard, and everyone swears in together. And the guy swore us in, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, you are now property of the U.S. government. And I thought, I'm property. I'm not even a person. I am a piece of property. But and I speak negatively about my military experience, but it was very rewarding, and for some people that can do that as a career, man, that's a very honorable thing to do. But I was a rebellious 18-year-old, and that's the perspective that I'm speaking from. I was in rebellion. I was in rebellion against the authority that God put into my life, against my parents. I didn't understand honor your father and your mother. And I wound up in a place where I would appreciate them, and God made me see how much they had done for me and how much they had taught me. And after a few days in the basic training, I appreciated them more than ever. I always tell my kids the story that I got in there, and there was guys that you had to tell them to take a bath. They didn't know. You had to tell them to brush their teeth. You had to tell them to clean their bed and clean their room, and they just didn't know. They didn't know how to use the laundry, how to use a washing machine. And I remember when I first got there, I thought we were going to stay in the bunk that they gave us, but we were only there overnight. Then we went into the basic training area. But they gave us sheets and blankets and everything, and I made my bed, and then I went to eat. And when I came back, there was a whole group of people around my bed, and one guy was on. One of the sergeants there was down on his knee, and I walked in the room, and they said, "That's him, Sergeant. That's his bed." He says, "Is this your bed, soldier?" I said, "Yeah, yes, Sergeant, it's my bed." He says, "Who taught you how to make this bed? Were you in the ROTC?" I said, "No, my mom taught me how to make that bed." And he was like, "She taught you military regulation." I'm like,
"Oh, wow."
And I don't think she did it on purpose, but it was like, he was like showing them the right angle of the, of the corner and everything. Exactly. I thought, it was just what I was taught. So anyway.
Your mom could have been a drill sergeant.
Yeah, exactly. But
I thought she was till you went into.
Yeah, exactly. I thought she was until I went into the Army.
All things are pointing to she was probably that way.
But once we were able to call home, I remember the first thing I told them was, "Thank you for all that you've taught me." Mm-hmm. I didn't need it after all. I thought I did. I think I could have got a job and gone and got an apartment and started my way. But it took that to make me realize everything that my parents had done for me. And it would be nice to say that after my military experience that I wouldn't experience anything like that again in regard to rebellion to authority. But no, there's authorities in our lives, and we rebel against them all the time. In jobs,
Mm-hmm.
You know, God, what is it, Bob Dylan that says everyone's got to serve somebody. At some point in our lives, we got to serve somebody. Even if you own your own company, you got to still serve the government.
Yeah.
You know, in regard to them being in your authority, and so we have to ask ourselves, who are the authorities in our lives? God puts authorities in our lives for us to understand the relationship that we have with Him. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's at work or home or it's the government, we will have authorities in our lives. And how do we feel towards them? What do you feel when someone in authority over you gives you a directive, when they give you a command? If you do not respect the person or their role, you will resent their instructions. If you do not respect the person or their role in your life, you will resent their instructions. I was also taught in the Army, there were some guys that I knew that were in longer than me, so they got higher rank than me, so they were my peer. Now they are my leader. I was the subordinate, and I just remember thinking, I don't like that guy. And one guy pulled me aside and said, "You might not like the guy, but you got to respect his rank. Mm-hmm. When they're in a specific role, you might not like them or respect them as a person, but you got to respect the rank that they're in. When they're put in that area of authority over you, you have to respect them. And we have to understand our roles in our families, in our marriages, and with our families, with our children. If they're step parents, there's respect that they need as well. So whatever the situation is, we've got to serve somebody. We have to respect the authorities over us. There's a great example. We watched Saving Private Ryan on Memorial Day.
Oh yeah.
And I love that scene when right after they took the Normandy beach and they've been given the assignment to go find Private Ryan, and they're cutting across the field and they're complaining about their situation to the captain, the Tom Hanks character, and they said, "What do you think about this?" He goes, "Well, I wouldn't complain to you. Complaints don't go down. Complaints go up." Mm. He says, "You've never heard me complain. I don't complain to you. I complain up."
Wow, that's interesting.
And then they said, well, what would you say to the major about this mission? And he'd say, "I would say, Major, thank you for this job that you've given me. It's an honorable position. I really, I look forward to doing this and maybe even giving my life, to find Private Ryan." And they're like, because he's not going to complain.
Yeah.
If you have a leader that complains down,
right, then
that's not a good leader. Leaders, they lead the people and they lead them in the right direction. They don't stir them up. So God puts authorities in our lives to teach us a lesson, because we are rebellious by nature. We can see this in the sweetest, cutest little lovable baby. They sin. I never taught my kids how to sin, but from the earliest days, that's what they do. In fact, we have to teach them to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. Babies are selfish from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Why are they crying? Because they're hungry. They're thinking about themselves. It's about, really, it's just about them. They're thinking about themselves because they don't know. I mean, they're trying to survive. But I remember once my oldest, our first child, when there was like a little crumb we used to call her Eagle Eye, because she'd see the smallest crumb on the floor and go put it in her mouth. And we'd say, "No, don't do that." And she'd crawl over to the floor. And she knew. She'd stop in front of it. "No." And she'd reach and try and quickly grab it and put it in her mouth. What's wrong with that? Or they take something. "Did you eat that?" "No." It's like, who taught them how to lie? But they know, from the beginning. So it's just inherent in our nature. We can see that. We might see them share, but for the most part, we have to teach them the ways of God. We've got to teach them what's right, because we're born into a fallen world. We are fallen as we're born. We're born sinners. None of us have reached the place where we don't sin. Even as believers, we still have this sinful nature. In Romans 3:10-11, Paul says, "There is none righteous, not even one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks for God." So again, how do you feel about the authorities in your life? When you're told what to do, for some, this area is easier than other people. And we figure it's easier to lead. And as I get older, the more it's becoming strange to me that I'm seeing people in authority who are over me who are younger than me.
Mm-hmm. Which is my age.
And it's just kind of like, oh, you're the pastor? Or, oh, you're the police officer? Or you're the doctor?
Right.
I'm looking for a dentist, and I'm looking at, how many years have they been? They've only been a dentist for 10 years?
Yeah.
Thinking, what? Wait a minute, how old am I? But it's, so it's this change that I have to make in my life to respect the authority of younger people over me. I mean, it's a change that I have to make. Frederick Bruner, one of the guys I use his commentary, he says that the Magi were a picture of what we were in an external sense. He says they were separate from Christ, they were excluded from the commonwealth of Israel, and they were strangers to the covenants of promise, having no hope and without God in the world. Mm-hmm. So the Magi were a picture of people who are totally lost, and then God brings them in. And Herod is a picture of people, is a picture of what we are in an internal sense. Living in the lusts of our flesh, indulging in the desires of our flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, even as the rest. So Herod is a picture of us internally. The Magi are a picture of us externally, being physically away. Mm-hmm. Now Herod is a picture of what we have inside us. So as we go through the Bible, and not just this book, but any other book, and we find characters like Herod, and usually we just shake our head and say, "Man, that was a bad guy. I'm glad I'm not him." But we need to try and identify with characters like this, or at least say, how do I see Herod in me? How do I see Herod in me? These characters are in the Bible here for us to learn from. And in fact, that's the title of this teaching, is Herod in Us.
Well, you could use that in just about everybody in the Bible that you can think of.
Yeah.
You can pick out those things that made them such bad people.
Yeah.
And look at examine yourself.
And it's easy just to sit back and go, yep, that was a bad person.
Yeah.
But when we put it in that perspective and say, wow, how do I identify with this person? Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's when God really starts working in our hearts.
Or Democrat, Republican.
Okay.
I mean, it's like there's a picture of each, and we just read the definitions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So some characters in the Bible we may relate to, others we won't. But there are lessons that can be learned if we do this. We all have some Herod in us, and that's called the flesh. It tempts us. It causes us to doubt. It causes us to hate. It causes us to resist our King and his rule over our lives. It just causes us to rebel. Herod heard the gospel. Herod had a chance to change like the Magi. God gave him a chance. He laid out the gospel. The King of Israel, the Messiah, has been born right here. And he called the priests and the scribes. He heard the proclamation from the Magi. Then he called the priests and the scribes, and they read the word of God to him. Remember that the Magi can only get so far. They got to Israel, and they're like, okay, they get to Jerusalem. Okay, now where is this king at? They didn't know. They followed the star as far as it could bring them, but then it took the word of God to say he's in Bethlehem when they read that passage. So Herod saw all that. He heard all that.
Have the Holy Spirit.
But he didn't accept. He wasn't moved. He heard the word of God. The Magi proclaim the birth. The prophets tell him the location of the birth, but Herod rejects it, even though there is the miraculous star and all these wonderful things that are happening. Even though the Magi traveled from this faraway distance, and even though the word was very clear, Herod still rejects God. Herod tells the Magi, go and search carefully for the child. He couldn't even bring himself to say the king or the Messiah. He says, go and find the child. And when you have found him, report to me so that I too may come and worship him. So really he was going to worship him? So the child wasn't Lord to Herod. He rejected him. Mm-hmm. The child wasn't God to him. How many people do we know have rejected Messiah? They've rejected the Word of God. They hear it, they mock it, they deny it. In verse 16 it says, "Then when Herod saw that he had been tricked by the Magi, he became very enraged and sent and slew all the male children who were in Bethlehem and all its vicinity from 2 years old and under, according to the time when he had determined from the Magi." So innocent children were killed. In his anger, Herod kills innocent children. In an attempt to keep the Messiah off of the throne, the innocent suffer. In an attempt to get his way, other people are hurt. So this is why the people trembled. This is why it said that the people were troubled also, because Herod was troubled, because they knew something was going to happen. This is probably his normal thing, the way that he operated. One commentary concludes, those who begin by hating the child Jesus, end up hurting children. Hating revelation leads to hurting people. If people will be ungodly, they will be inhumane. Okay, so those who begin by hating the child end up hurting people. Hating revelation leads to hurting people. And if people will be ungodly, they will be inhumane. And to me, it's this like describing abortion.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
If they hate the child Jesus, they're denying him. Yeah. They're being ungodly. Well, then they become inhumane. Mm-hmm. And if the more that I learn about abortion and just all the stuff that goes into that, into getting the girls in there, yeah, and then killing the baby, and then even afterwards, the devastation that it causes in their lives. Mm-hmm. That's just a horrible, horrible industry. Yeah. How could anyone in their right mind be associated with that? Romans 1:28-31 says, "And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice. They are gossips, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, or disobedient to parents, without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, unmerciful." That is a horrible description. Yeah. That is a horrible, horrible description. May that never be said of any of us, but that's what happens when God gives them over to their depravity. That's how people get. We watched a horrible movie. I mean, what was it called? No Country for Old Men. No Country for Old Men. The main guy, one of the main characters in that was just an evil person. He's just a killer and just killing. There's a scene where he's driving across this bridge and there's just a bird right there, and he shoots the bird for no reason. It's just to show how evil this character is. It's just, and yeah, when I read that, it reminded me of that. It's just he embodied evil. Well, that's like Herod. He's all of this is seen in him. And this is seen in the fall of man in the garden. Adam and Eve were against God. Adam and Eve were then against each other. So first they go against God, then they go against each other, then Cain goes against his brother, and he kills him. I mean, it just continues to branch out. And I'm not saying that everyone who rejects Messiah are going to turn out and end up being killers of people. But Jesus said, "Whoever is angry with his brother shall be guilty before the court." It's like murder, being angry at someone, being mad at someone, wishing them bad. It's like murder. It's murder in our hearts, and that's just anger, and that's just being angry at them. Yeah.
Both go.
Yeah, I think we could all do that. It's
that's pretty confusing though, because Jesus was angry quite a few times.
But
so just anger isn't a sin, probably.
Yes, he says
anger,
but don't sin. He says be angry, but don't sin. And I guess it depends on what we're being angry about.
Yeah.
What
we do about
it. Because his anger was against those people that were going against God.
Right.
It was a righteous anger.
It was righteous anger.
Yep.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So like when we think about Planned Parenthood and that anger rises up, that's a righteous anger that we have towards those people. If someone says something bad about us or does something to us, for us to have that kind of anger and, what about me? What about my reputation? What about my feelings? Or what about me? That's different when we start looking at for ourselves. So it's a selfish anger.
Yeah. What's the middle letter of sin?
I.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yep. Yeah, that's really, I got to remember that one. That was a good one.
Oh, he's got 10 million of those.
So how can we overcome anger? Well, by having peace, by having the peace of God. Not having a good relationship with God will result in bad relationships with each other. Not having good relationship with God will result in having bad relationships with each other, with other people. So if we have that good relationship with God, then it's going to be easier for us to forgive other people. It's going to be easier for us to overlook sin. The scriptures say that love covers a multitude of sin. And we're not going to be angry at every single little thing that happens. I like a description of if you have a full cup of something and someone bumps into you, whatever is in that cup is going to spill out. If you got coffee in there, coffee's going to spill out. If you've got Mountain Dew in there, Mountain Dew's going to spill out. So that's the same with us. Whatever we have our heart filled with, if our heart is filled with anger and then someone tips us or steps on our toe, that's what comes out.
So true.
If we're filled with happiness and joy because of the love of God and someone sets us off, well, that's what's going to come out. That's what's going to overflow out of us. And so we need to make sure that we have that relationship right with God, that we're filled with His joy and peace, and that's going to bring about the peace of God. This is true in our marriages, in our families, in our communities, in our workplaces. Peace with God first. We have to have peace with God first, and then that'll overflow into the rest of our relationships. Do we trust in God enough to obey Him? And do we trust that He knows what He's doing in our lives? Sometimes like, man, God, in case you didn't know, I'm in trouble over here. Do you understand that He has you in the place where you are for a reason? If this is true, then you are learning from the situation that you're in, if you trust Him. Angry people will typically look for the negative in a situation. They are quick to find fault. They are quick to tear down. Angry people are actually angry at God. Angry people are angry at God's way of doing things. He's not doing things the way that they would have. They want things done their way and in their time. We have to be content and have faith that God knows what He is doing. He's doing what He's doing and how He's doing it for a reason, for His reason. He's got a reason why He's doing it. We don't need to know that. We don't need to know why. We just need to do what we're supposed to do and never mind everyone else and anything else. Once we've resigned ourselves to the fact that God is sovereign and He is in control, then we can live a happy, stress-free life. But it all begins with faith. Faith in God. Faith in God comes from peace with God. If we have peace with God, we can trust Him and we can give everything to Him. So do we have peace with God? Are we good with Him? Have we made Him the King of our life? Again, do we trust what He is doing in our life? And do we understand that He has us in the place where we're in for a reason, for His reason? So the chapter ends with an announcement of Herod's death. Verse 19 says, "But when Herod died, behold, an angel of the Lord came. Messiah is born, and behold, Magi, messengers from the Gentiles, come. Herod dies, and behold, an angel, a messenger from God, comes." So don't worry about the Magi. Don't worry about Herod. Don't worry. Nothing will thwart the plan of God. Okay, they thought that the Magi was going to come and do something bad, but no, they brought good news. So nothing is going to thwart the plan of God. Psalm 146, 3-5 says, "Do not trust in princes, in mortal men, in whom there is no salvation. His spirit departs, he returns to the earth. In that very day, his thoughts perish. How blessed is he whose help is the God of Jacob, whose hope is the Lord his God." So no matter what Herod's plans were, no matter what his intentions were, they didn't happen. Herod's plan was thwarted, but not the plan of God.